You wake up in the dark. The kind of dark that feels like velvet soaked in regret. You don't know where you are, but the walls are stone, the air is damp, and something just scurried across your foot. It's either a rat or a demon. At this point, it doesn't matter. You're in medieval Europe now, and guess what? You're not special. You don't have a sword, you don't have a title, and you definitely don't have soap. But you do have something even worse, curiosity. And tonight, that curiosity is about owls. Not just owls. Night owls. Feathered omens of doom. Medieval Europe's favorite scapegoat for literally everything they couldn't explain, which, spoiler alert, was most things. You're probably wondering, why were people so scared of a bird that looks like a fluffy marshmallow with eyes? Well, put on your rough-spun wool tunic, light a candle that smells faintly of goat, and try not to inhale the chamber pot fumes. Because this is going to be a long, dark night. Literally. So before you get too cozy on your straw mattress, which, by the way, is infested with at least 3 different kinds of beetles, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fun to see who's drifting off to the sweet sounds of historical despair from around the world. Okay, let's talk about why owls, yes, actual owls, were basically flying harbingers of death to the average medieval peasant. To you, right now, they're wise little forest librarians. To someone in 1312, they were screeching demon parrots sent to ruin your crops, kill your baby, and possibly seduce your livestock. We'll unpack that. Slowly. Very slowly. Because you've got time. About 3 hours of it. So, you stumble out of your hovel. Because you don't live in a house. You live in a one-room thatched roof disappointment that's about as waterproof as a sponge with commitment issues. It's the middle of the night, and you've been woken up by a horrible noise. It sounds like a haunted flute played by a dying goat. You look out into the misty treeling. You see nothing. But then you hear it again. That unholy shriek. Congratulations. That's an owl. Probably a barn owl. And according to your 14th century brain, which, frankly, is mostly soup and superstition, that sound means someone's going to die. Possibly you. Probably not today. But soon. And unpleasantly. Now, to be fair, owls do sound terrifying at night, especially if you don't know what they are. And you don't. Because nobody's given you a nature documentary, a biology class, or a functioning frontal lobe. You've heard stories, though. Stories told by people with 6 teeth and 17 children, most of whom are named some variation of elf something. And these stories? They're never good. Owls show up before bad things happen. Owls mean the witch is watching. Owls mean the plague is coming. Owls mean that time Reginald the turnip farmer lost all his pigs in one night and blamed it on the screaming sky ghost. That owl? Cursed. Definitely cursed. But it goes deeper. You see, medieval folks didn't just dislike owls. They assigned them a whole resume of evil. In some places, people thought owls were the literal embodiment of witches. Like, the bird wasn't just a messenger, it was the witch. Transformed. Why? Because apparently women turning into birds was more believable than a woman owning property. Some believed witches could shapeshift into owls to fly around at night and suck the souls out of babies or cows or, on a slow night, your hope. Of course, you don't need to have done anything wrong for the owl to find you. Maybe you just looked at it the wrong way. Maybe your neighbor's goat died, and now people are whispering that you have the look, which is code for, you have a mole, and they're feeling stabby. Let's back up. Medieval Europe was a big place full of small minds and even smaller candles. But we can generalize a bit. If you lived in, say, 12th century France, Italy, England, or basically anywhere not actively on fire for war or famine, which is nowhere, really, you were living in a thick soup of folklore, fear, and poorly translated scripture. And owls? They featured in all of it. The Bible? Oh yes. Owls get a few cameos. Specifically, in Leviticus, where they're lumped into the list of things you should absolutely not eat. Alongside bats, camels, and basically anything that looks remotely delicious. But because scripture was often interpreted by monks who hadn't slept in 30 years and were high on fermented turnips, these animals took on deeply symbolic meanings. Owls, being nocturnal and solitary, became symbols of desolation, mourning, and evil. Basically, If it had big eyes and didn't party in groups, it was probably the devil. You see, nighttime in medieval Europe wasn't just dark. It was dark dark. Like, don't even think about leaving the house or you'll be eaten by a ghost wolf kinda dark. There were no street lights, no flashlights, not even a reliable torch unless you were wealthy, which you aren't. You are aggressively poor. Your life expectancy is next Tuesday, and your best friend is a goat that hates you. And so, when something flapped through the air, making bone-chilling sounds and looking like it crawled straight out of a gothic fever dream, people didn't think neat bird. They thought, the Grim Reaper's pet is here. Now imagine you're a child in a village that doesn't even have a name, just a direction like Upper Westfield Hollow of the Bleeding Bog. Your granny tells you, if you hear the owl, someone in the village will die. You ask how she knows. She says, because it's always been true. And that's the end of the conversation. No peer-reviewed data. Just trauma and breadcrumbs. But it's not all the villagers' fault. The owl itself is kind of to blame. Not in a moral way. Owls aren't evil, they're just horrifying by accident. Let's take the barn owl. Its call is a raspy screech that sounds like an air raid siren if the siren had asthma. Add in its ghost white feathers and eerily human-like face, and you've got yourself the perfect candidate for avian Satan. By the way, you're still standing outside your hovel at this point. It's cold. Your toes are numb. You can smell your own breath, and it smells like onions and guilt. You can hear the owl again, louder this time. You try to go back inside, but your door is stuck. That's okay. It's not like insulation is a thing. You sleep under 2 layers of itchy wool and the vague hope that you won't be accused of sorcery in the morning. Oh, and the owl isn't just watching from the trees. Sometimes it lands on rooftops, which, in many areas, was considered a bad omen, like dig your grave bad. People would throw stones, shout prayers, even try to light fires to scare it away, which, of course, probably worked about as well as screaming at your Wi-Fi router. Let's take a short detour, because you might be wondering, didn't other cultures like owls? Good question, half-asleep listener. Yes, some did. The ancient Greeks, for instance, were owl fans. Athena, the goddess of wisdom, had an owl as her symbol. But that was 1,000 years earlier and very far away. Medieval Europe had other priorities, like not dying of the plague or avoiding accidentally worshipping a pagan tree spirit, or not being burned alive for reading too much. So by now, you're probably cold, confused, and deeply afraid of birds. Congratulations. You're fitting right in. And it's not just you. Local priests warned people against the owl's unclean presence. Monks wrote poems about owls as death's heralds. There were entire bestiaries, medieval animal encyclopedias, filled with unsettling illustrations of owls doing things like perching on skulls or flapping around graveyards for no reason other than vibes. And let's not even get into the connection between owls and the devil. Because yes, of course that's a thing. Everything was tied to the devil. Cows stopped producing milk? Devil. Wife has an opinion? Devil. Saw a bird with big eyes? Double devil. The church, not one to miss an opportunity for branding, associated owls with darkness, both literal and spiritual. Owls, being nighttime creatures, became metaphors for those who turned away from the light of Christ. It was religious branding at its most feathered. And this paranoia wasn't confined to the countryside, either. Even in towns where people had slightly more access to education and fewer chickens in their beds, the sight of an owl could set off a panic. Merchants would refuse to open shop. Pregnant women would pray. Children would cry, not because of the owl necessarily, but because that was their full-time job. You're still outside, by the way. The moon is full. The wind is howling. And the owl? It's still there. Watching. Waiting. Screeching occasionally like a medieval kazoo of doom. You finally get your door open, crawl back into bed, and try to forget everything. But you can't. Because somewhere in your lice-ridden hair, a thought lingers. What if the owl was looking at you? You pull your wool blanket tighter. It smells like damp sadness. You try to fall asleep, but now you're wondering if your neighbors saw the owl too. And if they didn't, maybe that means something. Maybe it chose you. Maybe this is it. Your soul's about to be sucked out of your body and devoured by a bird in a tragic feather boa. But don't worry. You're probably fine. Unless you're not. Let's pause there. Not because the owl has left, but because this is just the beginning. There's still so much more to cover: the witch trials, the folk songs, the exorcisms, the bizarre protective rituals involving urine and salt, and the fact that some people tried to domesticate owls. Yes, really. But for now, breathe deeply. In through the nose. Out through the catastrophic historical trauma. You've survived one night. Just don't look out the window. The owl's still there. You wake up. Barely. It's morning in the loosest possible sense, meaning the sky is a slightly lighter shade of eternal damp. The rooster has screamed its blood-curdling shriek, probably to assert dominance over the goats again, and someone's already burning something suspicious smelling outside. Breakfast is served, and by breakfast we mean yesterday's barley porridge, now colder, firmer, and somehow sadder. Congratulations, you've survived a night in medieval Europe. But you didn't sleep well. Why? Because you heard an owl. Or you think you heard an owl. It might have just been a fox choking on a badger or the wind shrieking through a crack in your hovel's rotting wall, but it sounded like doom. And in your world, that's good enough to ruin your week. You step outside and look at the sky. Gray. Always gray. It's not raining, but the air is so thick with moisture it's basically pre-rain, like the weather's just holding back out of spite. You rub your eyes, stretch your aching limbs, and immediately feel the familiar sting of flea bites. At least you're not alone. Everyone in your village is itching something. Insects are your most consistent friends. Now, last night, you met the owl. Or at least, the sound of one. But today, you'll find out how seriously people take that encounter. Because in your village, the sighting of an owl isn't a passing note. It's an event. Like a solar eclipse or someone in town taking a bath. Word spreads fast, like gossip with a Black Death. Someone saw an owl, they say, all hushed and dramatic. You nod gravely, pretending you weren't the one who saw it. Because you've got enough problems. You don't need people thinking you've been chosen. That kind of attention ends with firewood and accusatory chanting. Your neighbor, Jitha, a woman who smells like fermented cabbage and supernatural anxiety, is already on the warpath. It flew over the church, she hisses. That's a sign. That's definitely a sign. You ask her what it's a sign of, and she stares at you like you've just licked a relic. Death. Or famine. Or something unnatural. You remind her that everything around here is unnatural. The pond glows at night. The priest mutters in Latin even in his sleep. And the bread you ate yesterday tried to bite back. But Jitha's not amused. She's already lighting a bundle of herbs and waving it around like a sacred rattle. You make a mental note to avoid her for the rest of the week. So why, you might wonder, was the owl such a big deal? Why not, say, a crow or a bat, or literally any other spooky nighttime creature? Well, here's the thing. Crows are ominous, sure. But they're common. Bats? Weird little sky mice, yes, but at least they mind their own business. Owls, though, owls stare. They don't just exist, they observe. Their heads swivel around like cursed weather vanes. Their eyes are big enough to house a small civilization. And worst of all, they don't blink. Ever. It's as if they're trying to hypnotize you into confessing your sins. Which, let's be honest, you've got plenty of. Remember that time you stole an extra turnip? So does the owl. Always watching. Now, let's take a short detour. You know, like your thoughts do when you're trying to fall asleep but your brain insists on replaying every social interaction since 1310. Imagine you're in 13th century Germany. A small town with a name like St. Schlachtenscheiskias, nestled in the woods, just far enough from the empire to be mostly ignored and mostly cursed. Here, owls weren't just seen as omens, they were active participants in local folklore. In fact, some believe that owls whispered secrets to witches. Literal whispering. As in, a crone would sit in the woods, muttering to her feathered confidant, who would hoot back cryptic messages like some sort of evil fortune-telling Alexa. If an owl perched near your home, you weren't just unlucky, you were marked. The villagers would gather, point fingers, and soon, someone would end up falling into a well or accidentally catching on fire. Funny how accidents increase when mobs are involved. But even beyond Germany, across medieval Europe, owls had a rotten PR agent. In Welsh folklore, for instance, there's Blodyd, a woman made of flowers, who was transformed into an owl as punishment for adultery. Imagine that, not just exile or death, but eternally feathered shame. She was cursed to roam the night, shunned by all birds. Even pigeons wouldn't sit with her. And then there's the Slavic world, where owls were tied to the souls of the dead. People believed that if you saw an owl near a cemetery, it wasn't just visiting, it was guiding. Owls were thought to ferry lost souls to the underworld. You know, like a feathery Uber for ghosts. Very efficient. 0 stars. Back in your village, things are escalating. The priest, who, notably, can't read and gets most of his sermons from a hand-copied manuscript filled with doodles, has heard about the owl. He's now sprinkling holy water around town, which, if we're being honest, smells suspiciously like the pond behind the latrine. He declares that this is a time for vigilance and repentance. Everyone should attend Mass. Twice. And donate something valuable. You check your pockets. You own 3 things, a pebble, a string, and a deeply repressed memory of childhood joy. You offer the pebble. He accepts it gravely. Now, let's shift gears a little. We've covered the fear, the folklore, and the frantic finger-pointing. But let's talk about what people actually did when they encountered an owl. Step 1, panic. Step 2, more panic, but louder. Step 3, rituals. Lots of them. You see, in the absence of science, people turn to creativity, which, in this context, means nonsense with conviction. Some villagers believed that you had to spit 3 times to ward off an owl's curse. Others would burn juniper branches or hang bits of iron over doorways. In certain regions, you were advised to sleep with your socks on backwards and your mouth covered, so the owl couldn't steal your breath. This, of course, made nighttime incredibly uncomfortable and mildly fatal. One particularly odd ritual involved owl feathers. People believed that if you found an owl's feather, you had to burn it immediately, but only after placing it under a clay pot and chanting the Lord's Prayer backwards. Not a single part of this was easy or pleasant. And if you got it wrong, congratulations, you just summoned the devil. Again. By the way, if you were wondering whether the owl cared about any of this, the answer is no. It's a bird. It's trying to eat a vole. It doesn't know that you're screaming Latin at it or waving a sausage in its direction as a protective talisman. Yes, sausage magic was a thing. Long story. But back to you. It's been a long day. You helped patch your neighbor's leaky roof with mud and despair. You churned butter so violently you gave yourself tendinitis. And now, as the sun sets or threatens to set behind yet another wall of fog, you're back inside. Dinner is a gray lump of pottage, spiced with whatever was growing near the outhouse. It's terrible. You eat all of it. You lie down on your hay-stuffed mattress. You try not to think about last night's owl. You try not to think about the whispering you heard near the woods earlier. You try not to think about the strange bruise on your leg shaped suspiciously like a beak. But then, you hear it. Ho! It's back. Louder this time. Closer. More judgmental. Your eyes snap open. You stare at the ceiling, which is mostly spider webs and mild existential dread. You wonder if the owl knows your secrets. You wonder if the owl is your secret. You wonder if, maybe, you're becoming the owl. No, that's ridiculous. Or is it? Sleep doesn't come easy. Not tonight. Not with the owl watching. Not with the villagers whispering. Not with the creeping sense that something's coming. Something old. Something feathery. But rest. Because tomorrow we dive deeper. We'll uncover what the owl meant in the witch trials, how it was used in medieval torture folklore, yes, that's a thing, and why certain nuns kept sketching them into the margins of religious texts with deeply unsettling captions. Close your eyes. Try to sleep. Ignore the sound outside. It's probably not an owl. Probably. You wake up again. Except this time, you're not sure if you even slept. Maybe you just laid there, eyes wide open, rim stiff, ears tuned to every rustle outside. Maybe the owl didn't hoot again, but the idea of it was enough. That heavy, slow-motion dread, flapping its wings just outside your shuttered window. You drag yourself up with the energy of a dying snail, and remember, you live in a time when people thought sneezing too loud might summon Satan. So yes, if you heard an owl, you should probably start preparing your will. Assuming you own anything worth bequeathing, which you don't. Your best item is a spoon. The village is quieter this morning. Too quiet. Not peaceful quiet. Witch trial quiet. The kind of quiet that usually comes right before someone gets blamed for something. You step outside, trying to look as unsuspicious as possible, which is difficult when your only clothes are a brown sack and a belt made from horsetail. You stretch your back and hear 5 distinct cracks. One of them might have been your soul. And there it is. The owl. Again. Except now it's painted. On the side of a chapel. In charcoal. Not a cute, cartoony owl. This thing has teeth. Owls don't have teeth. But that hasn't stopped someone, probably a sleep-deprived monk, from giving this one a full set of jagged human molars. Just to emphasize the horror. Great. There's already a crowd. Old Jitha is sobbing into her shawl. The village blacksmith, who usually smells like goat breath and regret, is shouting about the curse of the feathered fiend. You try to blend in, which is difficult, because someone just muttered, "Didn't you hear it first?" You deny everything, boldly, dramatically, the way only a guilty medieval peasant can. You clutch your chest and say something about divine signs, and how the owl probably just wants us to live better lives, eat more oats, stop sacrificing rats to the butter churn, and maybe take a bath once a season. No one buys it. Let's step back for a moment. Why did people draw owls in places they shouldn't be? Why did they scratch them into walls, ink them into manuscripts, and burn them onto wooden charms? Because nothing screams subtle message like the image of a soul-devouring bird watching you poop. In medieval marginalia, those weird, often hilarious doodles monks scribbled in the corners of holy texts, owls show up a lot. Usually in scenes that make no theological sense. Like, an owl riding a horse backwards. An owl wearing a bishop's hat. An owl being pelted with rocks by 5 angry nuns. These weren't just the fever dreams of bored scribes, though, let's be real, that was part of it. They were statements, allegories. In many of these images, the owl stood in for sin, stupidity, or spiritual blindness. Because, you see, owls don't come out during the day. They shun the light. And in a time when light equals God, anything that actively avoids the light equals definitely suspicious. Satanic, even. So monks, those celibate, over-caffeinated copy-pastors of ancient wisdom, would gleefully draw owls being harassed by the virtuous. Sometimes those virtuous characters were dogs. Sometimes pigs dressed as knights. Sometimes just literal human fists. The symbolism was never subtle. Meanwhile, peasants didn't need manuscripts to fear owls. They had lore, passed down by grandmothers with 12 teeth between them, told around fires fueled by goat dung and paranoia. One such tale? The owl that ate the moon. According to certain alpine legends, owls were responsible for eclipses. That's right. If the moon went dark, it wasn't a natural cosmic alignment. It was an owl, hungry for light, taking a bite out of the sky. And if you happened to be outside during that moment, well, enjoy being cursed. Forever. Another common tale across Brittany and northern France was of the hibou diminuit, the midnight owl. Said to appear only on the eve of tragedy, this bird's cry was so potent it could cause miscarriages, crop failure, or worse, a bishop's visit. And if you saw its eyes, you had 3 days to confess your sins before something came to collect you. Not God. Something else. Back in your village, the priest is now in a frenzy. He's declared a 3-day fast. No meat. No mead. No merriment. You glance at your diet, which already includes none of those things. Congratulations. You're ahead of the spiritual curve. He also suggests symbolic punishments to cleanse the town, starting with someone sleeping in the woods for a night to appease the spirits. You volunteer Jitha. She does not take it well. Now, let's move into the darker territory. Because while owls were creepy in art and folklore, they were positively terrifying in one particular context. Witch trials. Ah yes, the crowning achievement of medieval logic. When anything unusual, weather, illness, goats giving side-eye, could be blamed on someone with too many cats and a knowledge of herbs. And guess who was often accused of being the witch's familiar? Yep, owls. Especially barn owls, with their ghost-white faces and blood-curdling screeches. People didn't understand those sounds. They didn't have wildlife documentaries or David Attenborough explaining, "Here, the owl devours its prey with gentle crunching sounds." All they heard was screaming from the trees, and assumed it was Satan practicing vocal warm-ups. In parts of Scotland and northern England, Courts even recorded trials in which people claimed to see owls flying around a suspected witch's home just before illness struck. Coincidence? Obviously. But at the time, that was all the jury needed. In one infamous case, a woman named Elspeth Muir was accused of sending her owl, a demon in feathery disguise, to peck the eyes out of a rival's livestock. No one asked how that worked, or if the owl had a motive, or if it had unionized. They just built a pyre. But it wasn't just women who feared this connection. Even holy men were paranoid. One monk in the 14th century wrote an entire treatise about creatures of the night and included owls alongside wolves, toads, and suspiciously quiet sheep. He suggested that owls might be fallen angels in feathery tombs, which sounds poetic until you realize he was completely serious and also possibly drunk. Let's not forget the medical side of things. Because naturally, people tried to cure the owl curse. With owl parts. Yes, you heard that right. According to medieval medicine, powdered owl beak could cure gout. Owl eggs? Rub them on your forehead for headaches. Burnt owl feathers mixed with pig urine? Great for warding off toothaches, apparently. We have no records of this actually working, but plenty of records that say then he died. So what happens next? You guessed it. Another owl sighting. This time, 2 of them, perched in a dead tree, staring straight at your window like feathery debt collectors. Jitha screams so loud her teeth rattle. The priest starts muttering in Latin, except you're pretty sure he's just saying vegetables backwards. And the villagers are ready to act. It's time for the big ritual. They gather in the town square. Someone brings out a chicken. Another person brings out a sock. No one really knows what to do, but they commit to it. They tie the sock around the chicken's neck, wave it in a circle, and chant something that sounds vaguely like a medieval Yelp review. Then they all point at the owls and shout, "Begone!" The owls do not begone. They blink. Slowly. Then one of them poops. Which, in owl terms, is a mic drop. You return home, defeated. You lie down on your straw mattress, which now smells vaguely like regret and mildew. The fire's gone out. Your candle's flickering. And outside, the owls are still there. Watching. Waiting. But maybe, just maybe, they're not harbingers of doom. Maybe they're just birds. Maybe they're just misunderstood, feathery metaphors for everything medieval people couldn't explain. Like illness, or taxes, or where socks go when they vanish, or why bread keeps growing blue fuzz. Maybe, but also, probably not. You close your eyes. Try to rest. Because tomorrow, we look at how owls inspired medieval punishment devices, showed up in plague art, and why some nobles kept them as pets despite the crushing irony of feeding a bird they believed predicted their death. Sleep well. The owls are watching. You wake up. Again. Still in the same straw-stuffed apology for a bed. Still smelling faintly of cabbage and despair. The kind of bed where dreams go to die and backs go to herniate. But something's different this morning. There's a feather on your face. Not just any feather. An owl feather. Dark. Mottled. Suspiciously placed. You look around. Nothing. No owl in sight. No priest screaming. No Jitha clutching a crucifix, like it owes her money. Just a single, eerie feather sitting on your peasant nose like a divine prank. You swat it away, but the unease lingers. Like the smell of last night's turnip stew. Outside, the village is already bustling. Or, well, medieval bustling. Which is to say, 3 people are arguing about a haunted goat, one man is trying to milk a chicken, and a child is crying because someone told him bread was sinful now. You head toward the center of town, past crooked cottages and suspicious puddles, all while clutching that owl feather like a cursed lottery ticket. Today's big concern? The well. It's dry. Again. And that's obviously the owl's fault. You try to suggest that maybe, just maybe, it's because it hasn't rained in 2 weeks and people have been washing their sins away in it. But no. That's too logical. The owls are back. And the village is, once again, on the brink of unraveling faster than your only pair of socks. Let's talk about why this obsession with owls kept growing. How these feathered agents of doom went from nocturnal birds to full-blown symbols of divine judgment, political critique, and even fashion accessories. Because yes, at one point, noble women started wearing owl brooches. Ironically, like how people today wear vintage band t-shirts for concerts they never attended. Back to the well. It's now been sealed off with 3 planks of questionable wood and an even more questionable amount of holy water. The priest insists this will prevent a repeat of the Great Drought of 48, which you don't remember because you were literally a fetus then. He adds a charm for good measure, a small cloth bundle tied with hair and ash and, disturbingly, more owl feathers. Because nothing says keep the owls away, like using bits of owls. Welcome to medieval logic. This brings us to one of the more underrated elements of owl lore, their role in punishment. Specifically, the creative, horrific, slightly unhinged ways people tried to mimic or appease the owl when dealing with sinners. In some parts of Eastern Europe during the 13th century, it was customary to punish thieves, especially those who stole during the night, by making them wear owl masks. Yes, that's correct. Leather masks, stitched to look like owl faces, complete with exaggerated eyes and beaks. You'd be paraded through the village square like a rejected Hogwarts mascot, while children threw turnips and old women muttered prayers under their breath. The idea? You acted like an owl. Now be the owl. Shameful, nocturnal, and destined for metaphorical exorcism. Another punishment involved hanging small dead owls outside a criminal's house. Think of it as medieval Yelp, this one sucks. We gave him 0 hoots out of 5. The smell alone would discourage further mischief. Or breathing. Meanwhile, artists were getting creative. In plate paintings, those cheerful little reminders that 1 in 3 people were dead, owls started appearing in the background. Sometimes perched on rooftops. Sometimes in the hands of skeletons. Sometimes just floating inexplicably in the sky like feathered balloons of doom. Why? Because owls didn't just mean death is coming. They meant death is here, sipping mead, and he's brought snacks. But it wasn't all doom and despair. Let's talk about the nobles. Ah, the nobles. Those fragrant, velvet-wrapped paradoxes. On one hand, they feared the owl like everyone else. On the other, they adored the aesthetic. Because nothing says I'm wealthy and whimsical like keeping a death-omen bird in your private menagerie. You see, in the 14th and 15th centuries, falconry was all the rage. Every noble had a bird. Hawks, kestrels, eagles, nature's way of saying, I have money and 0 empathy for rodents. But some nobles wanted to stand out. Enter the owl. Beautiful, quiet, mysterious. Also, utterly useless for hunting during the day. But who cared? They weren't for function. They were for vibes. One duchess, Isabeau of Bavaria, famously kept a barn owl named Chanterelle, which means little singer, despite the fact that owls screech like broken car alarms. She'd bring it to feasts, let it perch near her wine goblet, and claim it whispered secrets about her enemies. No one dared disagree. Because disagreeing with a woman who accessorizes with omens? Not smart. Even certain kings adopted the owl aesthetic. Charles VI of France, also known as Charles the Mad because he once thought he was made of glass, kept an owl in his court for years. He believed it could detect lies. Which is awkward, because one time it hooted during a treaty signing, and he immediately had 2 advisors exiled for treason. Historical lesson: don't build a justice system around a bird with a digestive process that includes vomiting bones. Back in your village, the priest has had a revelation. He's decided that the owl isn't a symbol of death, it's a test. A divine test. A holy, feathery trial sent to judge the moral fiber of the community. And you, dear viewer, have been chosen. You are now the official owl watcher. Congratulations. This job comes with no pay, no food, and a 97% chance of being blamed for anything bad that happens from now on. Your duties include sitting in a cold field all night, staring at trees, listening for hoots, and probably hallucinating by 3 a.m. Because nothing sharpens spiritual insight like sleep deprivation and chronic hunger. You're given a cloak, woven from scratchy wool and broken dreams, and a staff with an owl carved into it. Badly. It looks like a potato with wings. But the people believe. And that's what matters. Your first night on duty is long. You hear rustling. You see shadows. Your candle burns low. Your stomach growls. The wind howls. At one point, something brushes your leg and you shriek loud enough to wake the ancestors. It turns out to be a hedgehog, possibly cursed. And then, just as you're drifting into that floaty, not quite awake, not quite dead zone, you hear it. The owl. A single hoot. Low. Slow. echoing across the hills like the world's most passive-aggressive air horn. You clutch your staff. Stand tall. Try to remember your training, which consisted of try not to pee yourself. And then, silence. Nothing. The owl doesn't come closer. It doesn't attack. It just watches. Like it always has. Maybe, just maybe, it knows something you don't. Something ancient. Something feathered. You return to the village at dawn, half frozen, half insane, and fully ready to collapse. The people cheer. Not because they like you, but because nothing exploded in the night. The priest calls it a sign. Jitha calls it a temporary reprieve. The blacksmith tries to sell you an owl-shaped mug. You decline. You sleep through the day. And when you wake again, covered in feathers that weren't there before, you realize the owls are still out there. And they've got more secrets to tell. Next time, we'll explore how owls showed up in medieval love spells, were blamed for royal deaths, and even made their way into crusader superstitions. Yes, the bird got everywhere, including Jerusalem. But for now, rest. Breathe. The owl will wait. It always does. You wake up again. This time with your head inside a sack. No, you're not being kidnapped. This is just the new sleepwear trend in your village. It's called pillow anxiety, and it's what happens when someone decides owl dreams are contagious and that covering your face with burlap will contain the visions. It doesn't. Now your face smells like old grain, and you've got hay in places hay should never be. Again, you peel the sack off your head and blink at the ceiling. Your cottage roof is still leaking in that one spot above your face. The damp patch has grown into a mysterious moss circle. The villagers think it looks like a halo. You think it looks like mold preparing to unionize. Outside, the town is unusually quiet, which, in a medieval village, is never a good sign. Silence doesn't mean peace. It means either everyone is plotting something or someone's goat has exploded again. You throw on your tunic, crunchy with yesterday's sweat, grab your owl watcher staff, still resembling a potato with wings, and step outside to investigate. The morning fog is thick, the kind that smells faintly of ash, sheep, and generational trauma. You push through it like a confused extra in a low-budget fantasy film. And that's when you see it. The tree. Or, rather, what's on the tree? An owl. Enormous. Perched like royalty on the old ash tree in the center of the village, eyes like glowing coins, unmoving, unbothered, and, if you didn't know better, deeply judging everyone in sight. The villagers are gathered around it in various stages of awe, terror, and theological confusion. Jitha is already weeping into her apron. The priest is holding a torch and a Bible. One man is drawing a picture of the owl in the mud using a stick and raw panic. You arrive just in time for the priest's proclamation. The owl has chosen our village. You don't remember anyone wanting to be chosen, but medieval people don't wait for consent when it comes to divine portents. He declares a vigil must be held, tonight, at the base of the owl's perch. Offerings must be made. Songs must be sung. Sins must be confessed. You're given the honor of leading the ritual, because of course you are. You've become the village's spiritual scarecrow. Congratulations. Now let's pull back the scratchy wool curtain and take a closer look at this phenomenon. How owls, in certain places and periods, became bound up in religious ritual, pagan hangovers, crusader superstition, and the weirdly intense world of medieval courtship. Yes, courtship. Because nothing says romance like involving an omen of death in your dating life. But first, let's go back to that ritual you're planning. You've been given a list of songs, all of them written by Brother Athelstan, the monk with halitosis and a lute tuned to the key of suffering. The lyrics include such gems as O feathered one of judgment gray, and hoot unto me, O watcher of sins. There's also food to be offered. Not that you have any. So the village sacrifices their finest barley mush and one terrified chicken. The chicken is not happy about this. The mush is indifferent. You also have to organize the candles. Candles that have been melted, remelted, and remelted again since 1237. They smell like regret and sheep fat. One of them has a human tooth embedded in it. No one talks about that one. As night falls, the ritual begins. The owl still hasn't moved. It just sits, quiet and all-seeing, like a feathery IRS auditor. You chant. People sob. A small child throws a rock at the owl and immediately trips over his own feet. Divine retribution is apparently very prompt. At some point, the priest starts speaking in tongues. Jitha has a full-blown spiritual episode. And the blacksmith proposes to the candle girl because he swears he saw the owl wink at him and take it as a sign from his dead wife. You can't make this up. Let's talk about how we got here. See, owls weren't always harbingers of evil. In early pagan Europe, they had mixed reputations. Some tribes, especially in the Baltic and Slavic regions, saw owls as sacred guardians of the night. They were believed to protect the souls of the dead as they crossed into the spirit world. But then, as Christianity spread across Europe, the narrative shifted. Suddenly, night was no longer mysterious and sacred. It was sinister and morally suspicious. And anything that thrived in it? Satan's in turn. Cue the demonization of nocturnal animals. Bats, wolves, cats, and of course, owls. Birds of prey with forward-facing eyes. Nature stalkers. They were rebranded as unholy messengers. In religious texts from the 11th and 12th centuries, owls appear as metaphors for spiritual blindness, desolation, and corruption. One monk wrote that the owl flits among tombs because it seeks to dwell among the unrepentant dead. Which is poetic, and also a little too vivid. But then things got even weirder during the Crusades. Picture this: Europe is marching across the Holy Land, wearing armor made of poor decisions and eating rations that taste like salted cardboard. Tensions are high. Everyone's sleep-deprived, sweaty, and spiritually anxious. One night, a crusader hears an owl hoot from the ruins of a temple. By morning, half his unit is dead of dysentery. Coincidence? Nope. The owl did it. From then on, owls were seen as spies for the enemy. Feathered traitors. Some crusaders even believed that Muslim defenders used trained owls to track Christian movements. Which is wildly inaccurate, but somehow fits the medieval tradition of giving birds way too much responsibility. In one bizarre incident recorded in a 13th century chronicle, a Templar knight reportedly stabbed an owl mid-flight and was then struck by lightning the next day. This was taken as confirmation that owls were divine agents. Because logic. Back in your village, the ritual ends with a candle being accidentally kicked into a hay bale. Fire breaks out. People scream. You save the chicken. The owl? Still hasn't moved. Absolute icon. Now, let's glide briefly into the realm of medieval romance. Because if there's one thing medieval people loved more than superstition, it was stuffing animals into poems about unrequited love. In courtly love literature, the owl became a symbol of melancholy, longing, and wisdom unspoken. Troubadours would compare their sadness to an owl alone in winter, which, to be fair, is a mood. One German poet even called his mistress my sweet night owl, which is either deeply romantic or slightly threatening. Some lovers sent each other owl-shaped trinkets. Others claimed to see owl feathers as a sign that their partner was unfaithful. And in one truly cursed tradition, suitors would leave actual dead owls on their beloved's doorstep if they were rejected. Because nothing says, "You broke my heart," like an avian corpse. Back in your world, things have quieted again. The owl is gone. Just like that. No noise. No flight. One moment it's there, and the next, just feathers drifting in the wind and the distant sound of someone panicking in Old French. The village is stunned. The priest collapses. Jitha faints. You, exhausted beyond reason, stumble back to your hovel and collapse onto your straw mattress like a sack of soggy laundry. You've lived through another night, another owl, and possibly another bout of existential dread. But the worst may be yet to come, because tomorrow is market day, and someone's bound to sell owl-shaped pastries now. You close your eyes. You dream of feathers, of hoots that echo through time, of birds that watch, and wait, and judge. Always. You wake up slowly this time. Not because you're rested. Not because you had a good night. And certainly not because life in a medieval village has suddenly become comfortable. No, you wake up slowly because every muscle in your body is locked in a position known medically as peasant rigor. Your back is shaped like a question mark. Your legs are numb. Your mouth tastes like a mixture of ash, onion, and the vague memory of an ancestral curse. You attempt to sit up, but your joints crack like a dying fireplace. The owl is gone, but its memory still haunts the room. Or maybe that's just the smell of moldy rushes and guilt. Either way, you're awake. And outside, It sounds like the village is already panicking. Again. Today's drama? Someone claims they saw the owl turn into a woman. Yes. A full-grown adult villager, a man who once got scared by his own reflection in a bucket, is now swearing that the owl shape-shifted midair and became a pale, naked woman with glowing eyes and suspiciously good posture. Naturally, this has launched a moral and spiritual crisis that rivals the time two pigs started walking in a straight line and everyone thought it was the apocalypse. The priest is raving about witches. Jitha has already burned 3 herbs and thrown salt in every direction, including into her own eye. And the village council, which consists of 3 men and a cow that everyone respects more than the men, has called an emergency meeting. You are, unfortunately, summoned. You show up to the council chamber, which is just a pig shed with slightly fewer pigs in it, and take your place on the splintery bench of disappointment. The Owl Watcher is now considered a spiritual authority, which is hilarious considering you've eaten nothing but stale oats for a week and think you're left I might be haunted. The council begins with dramatic gasps and much head shaking. The verdict? The owl is a striga, a word whispered in corners, said only after dark. Not because it's forbidden, but because people think saying it might summon something. Let's dive into the delightful rabbit hole that is European owl witch vampire folklore. Buckle up. In many parts of Eastern Europe, particularly Romania, Moldova, and Slavic regions, the owl is associated with supernatural female spirits. Enter the strigai. These were witches, undead women, or demonic entities who could take the form of owls, haunt the night, suck blood, and, most importantly, make grown men cry in their sleep. Think vampire, banshee, and passive-aggressive ex-wife all rolled into one. Stories of the striga tell of them transforming into birds at night, usually owls, flying over villages to spy, cast curses, and steal breath. If a baby died in the crib? Striga. If your cow stopped producing milk? Striga. If your left toe hurt for no reason? Guess what? Striga. To protect yourself, you needed garlic, iron, holy water, or just to never make eye contact with any bird bigger than a pigeon. This belief system made its way westward, where the owl became the go-to suspect for pretty much anything unpleasant. Even in parts of Germany, people believed in Nachthexen, night witches, who used owls as spiritual vehicles, like feathery Uber drivers for the damned. Now, back in your village, this new owl witch theory has spiraled into full-blown moral chaos. The priest is blaming lust. Apparently, the owl turned into a woman because someone, you, probably, had impure thoughts in its direction. You try to explain that no, you've never been attracted to a bird, but this is medieval Europe, where logic is treated like a heretic. Someone suggests burning the owl tree. Someone else suggests burning you. You vote to just burn dinner and call it a day. Eventually, things calm down slightly when a wandering tinker arrives and distracts the village with shiny bits of scrap metal and lies about having seen the king once. Everyone forgets about the striga for now. You're free to go home, for the moment, but the fear remains. Let's talk about hearing owls. See, medieval people didn't just fear seeing an owl. They feared hearing one, especially at night, especially if it hooted 3 times, or 5, or in a pattern that sounded vaguely like a Gregorian chant. In 14th century England, people believed that if an owl hooted outside your home, it meant someone in the house would die within 3 days. Naturally, this led to some creative owl deterrents, including hanging animal skulls from windows, painting eyeballs on doors, and shouting aggressively at trees. There are records of people hiring hooters, yes, owl impersonators, to lure real owls away from homes. Imagine a man standing in a field, hooting into the void for hours, while his family starves and the neighbors question their life choices. That's medieval job security. In France, it was believed that if an owl landed on your house, you had to immediately bake a cake, throw half into the fireplace, and give the other half to the oldest woman in the village. No one remembers why, but the oldest woman enjoyed free cake, so she never questioned it. Back in your life, you're trying to sleep. But every creak in the floorboards, every flutter of leaves, sounds like the beginning of another owl-based crisis. You dream of feathers again, and whispering, and Jitha chasing a shadow through the fields with a frying pan. You wake to the sound of a knock on your door. It's still dark out. The knock again. You open the door slowly, bracing for a ghost, a priest, or a poorly drawn wanted poster with your face on it. But it's none of those. It's a young girl from the village. She's clutching something, a feather. Not an owl feather. A raven feather. She says the owl came again. This time it didn't perch. It just circled 3 times. And dropped this. Everyone thinks this is the beginning of something worse. You thank her. Close the door. Sit with the feather. The raven means something different. A new omen. A new layer to the ever-expanding buffet of medieval dread. You sit there for a long time, staring at the feather. And you realize this isn't just about owls anymore. It never was. They're watching, listening, perched between worlds. And you, poor sleep-deprived viewer, are now caught in their gaze. Sleep now, if you can. There are more feathers to come. And the birds aren't finished with you yet. You wake up again. Because of course you do. This time, they're scratching at your door. Not scratching like a playful cat or a child trying to knock politely but failing. No, this is the slow, deliberate kind of scratching that says, I've come from the void, and I'd like a word. You don't even bother groaning anymore. At this point, your soul sighs before your body does. You creak your way out of bed, still just a wooden slab pretending to be comfortable, and stumble toward the door. You open it. Nothing. Just a thick layer of mist rolling across the village, making everything smell like wet wool and bad decisions. You look down. There, on the step, another feather. This one is not from an owl. It's glossy, dark, slightly oily. The kind of feather that seems like it's absorbing light rather than reflecting it. Raven again. Or maybe crow. Or maybe, if you were to believe the whispers, it came from something not listed in the animal kingdom. Something worse. Something with an agenda. You pick it up. Immediately regret it. Because of course it's damp. Of course it smells like old milk and burned parchment. You know, your standard cursed feather aroma. And here's the best part, the feather has something tied to it. A string. And on the string, a note. You squint in the pre-dawn haze and try to read it. The handwriting is jagged, like it was done by a terrified monk during a lightning storm. But you manage to decipher it. The owl returns at the moon's third rise. Prepare. You have no idea what that means. Because nobody in your village uses a lunar calendar. Most of you still think the moon is a kind of ghost potato. But you understand one thing, the owl is coming back. And this time, it's bringing friends. Now, before we spiral fully into paranoia and bad dreams, let's take a moment to pause, breathe, and remember why you're even still listening to this. This is the part where I politely and sleepily remind you that if you've been enjoying this slow, mildly cursed historical descent into feathered madness, consider liking the video and subscribing. Not because I need validation, I do, but because it lets me know you're still awake, still listening, and maybe still clinging to sanity in a world where birds are apparently semi-divine omens of existential despair. And leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is. It's always strangely comforting to know who else is awake at ungodly hours with the rest of us. Now, back to the dread. Let's explore the next chapter in our increasingly absurd saga of medieval owl fear medicine. Or, more accurately, the utter lack of it. Because you see, not only were owls feared as witches, demons, and freelance messengers of doom, they were also used in healing. Yes, healing. In a medieval way. Which means painful, possibly fatal, and wildly unhygienic. Let's say, for example, you have a toothache. A normal person might seek comfort. A warm compress. A broth. A quiet room. Medieval person? Find an owl. Grind its eyeballs into powder. Blow that powder into the mouth of the afflicted. Done. Problem solved. Tooth still hurts? Must be demons. Or perhaps you're suffering from gout, a popular and majestic medieval ailment that made your feet swell like regret. One 14th century folk remedy recommended taking an owl's talon, soaking it in wine, whispering a prayer backwards, and then taping the talon to your foot using goat intestines. Because science. Owls were also involved in childbirth. Of course they were. Nothing says comforting maternal experience like having a dried owl heart stitched into your birthing blanket. Some midwives even believed that placing an owl's wing under the bed would help draw the child forth, which is the most ominous way anyone's ever described birth. Still more cheerful news. In plague-ridden areas, villagers believed that burning owl feathers in a closed room could purify the air. This did not purify the air. It just filled it with the smell of burning bird, which is a scent best described as haunting poultry sadness. Back to your village. Today is Preparation Day, which, translated from medieval panic speak, means everyone is running around in circles screaming and blaming things on the moon. The blacksmith is forging something he calls a feather catcher, which is just a rake. Jitha has collected every holy object she owns and is now throwing them like confetti at anyone who sneezes. And the priest has announced that the owl is not just an omen, it is a test. A test from heaven, or hell, or maybe both, depending on which page of the scripture he misread this morning. You, of course, are given a job. Your task? Interview the elderly. Find out if this has happened before. Which means spending the entire day with people whose breath smells like leather and whose stories are 90% exaggeration and 10% phlegm. You visit the first elder, old Mareth. She hasn't left her cottage in 30 years and is known for throwing walnuts at children. She tells you that, yes, the owl came once before, 50 winters ago. It sat on her roof and hooted 5 times. The next morning, the village mill collapsed and 2 people married the same goat. You nod politely. Back away slowly. The next elder, Brother Finlow, claims that the owl is actually a former bishop, cursed for greed. He says the only way to stop it is to recite Psalm 119 while standing in a bucket of fermented cabbage. Again, you nod. Again, you leave. But it's the third elder who gives you pause. Her name is Una. She's nearly blind, nearly deaf, and entirely terrifying. She doesn't speak much. But when you mention the owl, she grabs your hand, pulls you close, and whispers one sentence. It remembers who betrayed it. Then she hands you a bone. Just a bone. No explanation. You leave, feeling very normal, very not haunted at all. The villagers, meanwhile, are building a shrine. It's mostly sticks, string, and wild speculation. They place offerings on it, honey, feathers, a turnip shaped like St. Cuthbert, and one single silver coin that immediately disappears under suspicious circumstances. You are expected to lead tonight's vigil. Again, because nothing says qualified like survived one owl encounter without exploding. You stand before the village as the sun sets. The fog rolls in like wet sorrow. And there, on the edge of the trees, a shadow moves. Not walking, not flying, just there. Watching. The vigil begins. You light candles. They sputter. You sing. The melody is just Please Don't Kill Us in Latin, set to the tune of despair. Jitha faints again. The blacksmith drops his feather catcher and shouts something about seeing glowing eyes. Then, silence. The owl appears. This time, not in the tree. In the sky. Circling. Slowly. Deliberately. It doesn't hoot. It doesn't flap. It just drifts. Like a judgment. You whisper a prayer. Or maybe just your own name, to remind yourself you're still alive. And then, just as suddenly, it vanishes. Into the mist. Gone. The village cheers. You don't. Because you saw something no one else did. A second shape. Larger. Following. Not an owl. Something worse. But you don't tell them. Not tonight. Let them sleep. You'll lie awake, counting feathers. Waiting. You wake up, not with a start this time, but with that slow, creeping sense that something somewhere has gone very wrong again. You're getting good at this. The dread feels familiar now, like a damp blanket or a recurring unpaid debt. You sit up. Your mattress smells like feet and firewood. Outside your single window, really just a hole with a wooden flap, the morning is unnaturally quiet. No birds. No dogs. Not even the usual shouting about bread theft or theological disagreements over whether pigs go to heaven. You step outside. The air is thick, like the village has collectively inhaled and forgotten how to exhale. A few villagers are milling about, glancing at the sky the way people do when they're expecting a dragon or, worse, taxes. And there, nailed to the door of the chapel, is a note. Not parchment. Not leather. Feathers. Someone, or something, has arranged dozens of small feathers into a message. The words are rough but clear. You were warned. This is, of course, not the kind of thing you want to see before breakfast. You go inside to check on Jitha. She's fine. Or at least alive. She's drawing circles in the dirt with a chicken bone and chanting something that sounds suspiciously like a recipe. You decide not to interrupt. The blacksmith is missing. The feather catcher is still by the fire, abandoned. His door was found wide open, heart still warm, and a single boot halfway across the threshold. No signs of struggle. Just one owl feather, perched neatly on his pillow. This, obviously, causes a small riot, which in your village means people scream for 10 minutes, blame a cow, then agree to build a bigger fire. So naturally, the council convenes again. Yes, in the pig shed. Yes, with the cow. Who, at this point, is your most level-headed diplomat? Theories abound. Some say the owl took the blacksmith as punishment. Others say he ran off with the tinker's wife. The tinker's wife, for the record, is 30% beard and recently claimed she could talk to bees. So this seems unlikely. The priest announces that this is clearly the beginning of the Oling, a foretold event that he definitely just made up. He reads a passage from a book no one has seen before. It's upside down. Someone suggests moving the entire village 2 miles north. A debate ensues over how many oxen that would take. A spreadsheet is drawn in dirt. Meanwhile, you go to check the woods. Because you, apparently, are the village's designated person who interacts with terrible things. You take a torch and a stick. The torch is mostly for light. The stick is mostly for psychological comfort. The woods are wrong. Not just dark. Wrong. The air smells burnt. The trees are humming. You know how trees aren't supposed to hum? Yeah, that. You find no sign of the blacksmith. But you do find carvings. Dozens of them. Fresh. Deep. Symbols you don't recognize, and you've seen plenty of weird scratches over the years. These look like a mix between bird tracks and alchemical nonsense. One symbol repeats over and over, a circle with 2 feather-like wings and what might be an eye or a mouth or both. In the center of the grove, a pile of feathers. Not owl. Not crow. Not anything you've seen before. They shimmer slightly. You touch one. Your hand burns. Just for a second, like frostbite and fire all at once. You shake it off and return to the village. You don't sleep that night. But others do. And one by one, they begin to dream. Not normal dreams. Not even nightmares. Visions. Every villager reports something different. A child dreams of flying through black clouds. A mother dreams of her baby turning into a feathered creature and flying out the window. The tinker dreams of standing in a field of owls, all of them staring, silently, until they open their beaks and speak in his father's voice. But your dream is the worst. You're back in the woods. But this time, the trees are gone. It's just sky. And feathers. And eyes. Hundreds of eyes. And in the center of them all, an owl. Bigger than any you've seen. Perched on something. It speaks. Not with words. But you know what it's saying. You broke the oath. You wake up drenched in sweat and dread. Your door is open. You didn't leave it open. Another feather on your floor. This one is red. And still warm. Before we dive deeper into this new chapter of nocturnal psychological terrorism, let's zoom out for a moment. Because if we're going to keep pretending this is relaxing bedtime content, we need to sprinkle in some historical comfort. You know, light facts, cheery medieval context. So let's talk about superstitions and sleep in the Middle Ages. Because if you think you're sleep deprived, you haven't met a 13th century peasant trying to survive owl season. In medieval Europe, night was basically when the rules of the universe stopped applying. The sun was gone. The church bells were silent. The nobles were asleep or drunk, and the only people awake were thieves, witches, ghosts, owls, and that one guy who claimed to talk to squirrels. So people feared the night. Not just feared, they structured their whole lives around not being awake when the sun went down. Homes were designed to be locked tight, windows shuttered, doors barred. People slept in shifts, first sleep and second sleep, with a waking period around midnight for prayer, checking livestock, or quietly freaking out about death. Children were told terrifying bedtime stories about night creatures. Owls featured heavily. One story from 12th century, Brittany claimed that owls were angels that had been cast from heaven for refusing to sing. They now flew through the night crying out in shame, and anyone who heard their call and didn't kneel would be cursed with madness. Charming. Another from northern Italy told of the civetta, a small owl that could steal memories. If you looked it in the eye, you'd forget your name, your purpose, your family. You'd wander the woods forever, hooting quietly until another Savetta took your place. Sleep well. So back in your village, everyone is now performing night rituals. Garlic around the doors, ashes over the thresholds, bells tied to children's ankles so they don't get spirited away. One man has shaved his eyebrows as an offering. No one asked him to. He just panicked. You, of course, are visited again. This time not by a bird, but by Una, the elder who gave you the bone. She's waiting outside your home, completely still, eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. You ask what she wants. She doesn't speak. She points at the moon, then at you, then at the woods, and finally at your chest. You feel something heavy inside you. Not metaphorically. Something in your pocket. You reach in. It's the red feather. Only now, it's changed. It's hard. Like stone. Or bone. Etched with tiny marks. You look up. Una is gone. No footprints. No sound. Just a faint smell of smoke and something very old. You don't sleep that night either. Instead, you sit by your hearth, holding the feather, staring into the flame, trying to remember if you ever made a promise you forgot. If you ever owed a debt to something that flies. And outside, just beyond the trees, something moves. Not the owl. Something bigger. You don't wake up this time. Because you never actually fell asleep. You just sat there. By the fire. Holding that feather that isn't a feather. Feeling a pulse. Yes, pulse. In your palm like it has its own tiny, confused heartbeat. It's not warm anymore. It's cold now. Cold like river stones. Cold like secrets. The fire died hours ago, but you didn't notice. Time has become vague. Wobbly. Like the memory of a dream or the last piece of bread in a famine. You blink slowly, realizing that daylight has returned, but none of the usual sounds came with it. No roosters. No dogs. Not even the neighbor with the annoying cough. You step outside. And you stop. Because every door in the village is open. Wide open. Chairs overturned. Hearts still smoking. Boots left behind like people vanished mid-step. And the feathers. They're everywhere now. Black ones. White ones. Red ones. Some still floating lazily through the air like it's snowing bird-based dread. The center of the village looks like someone tried to perform a summoning ritual using only poultry and confusion. There are symbols drawn in ash. Circles. Eyes. The same ones from the woods. You pick your way through, slowly, calling out. No answer. Not a soul. Until you reach the chapel. The door creaks. Of course it does. You push it open and step into the gloom. And there, in the middle of the floor, is Jitha. Alone. Sitting cross-legged. Surrounded by candles made from, let's say, mysterious substances, and leave it at that. Her eyes are open, but she doesn't blink. Not once. She's humming a tune that has no melody. Just 5 notes. Over and over. Like a warning. You step closer. She finally looks up at you. And she smiles. Then says, with perfect clarity, no accent, no madness, it's almost time. You do not like this. You ask, where is everyone? She points to the sky. And says, they answer the call. You ask, what call? She says, the one from the bone. Your hand instinctively grips the strange feather in your pocket. It's warm again. Burning, almost. You pull it out, but it's not a feather anymore. It's a key. Made of bone. Small. Pale. Ancient. And covered in the same marks that cover the woods, the village center, the chapel walls. You ask what it opens. But Jitha is already asleep. Sitting up. Still smiling. Now. At this point, if this were a modern story, you'd probably call for help. Maybe search for cell service. Maybe Google owl apocalypse symptoms. But you live in a village where Google is a man who died of oat rot in 1323. So instead, you do the only thing you can do. You head to the woods. Again. Because of course you do. This time, you walk with the bone key held tight in one hand and your stick in the other. Not that the stick has done much. But tradition is tradition. The trees feel different now. Older. Less like forest and more like cathedral. The leaves don't rustle, they whisper. As if they know things about you. which they probably do. Everything does these days. And then you find it. The clearing. Not the one with the feathers. A new one. This one has a stone circle. Huge. Rough-hewn. Covered in moss and something darker. Each stone is etched with the Ian feather symbol. In the center, a hole. Just big enough for the key. Because apparently the ancient forces of dread and darkness follow basic puzzle mechanics. You hesitate. Because obviously. And then you don't. Because of course. The key fits perfectly. You hear a click. No, not a click. A snap. Like a bone breaking underwater. Then silence. Then the ground moves. The stones shift. The clearing seems to breathe. And then, the sky darkens, not with clouds, but with wings. Owls. Hundreds of them. All sizes. All colors. All flying in a perfect circle above the clearing, spiraling upward like a feathered hurricane. The sound of their wings is deafening. Not flapping, throbbing. In the center of the sky, something larger appears. Not flying, falling, descending. The owl. Yes. The one. The source. The origin of all this avian panic. It's vast. Silent. Wings like thunderclouds. Eyes like moons. Beak like judgment. It lands with no sound, just impact. Like a dream you can't wake from. It looks at you. Directly at you. And speaks. Not with sound. But with understanding. You know what it wants. The key was a test. The dreams, the feathers, the vanishing villagers. All steps in a ritual that you, unwillingly, have been completing. The final piece is you. You were never a witness. You were a participant. A replacement. The owl has returned to claim a new watcher. Because in ancient times, before even your village, before your ancestors, the world was ruled not by kings or popes, but by guardians of the threshold. Beings who kept balance. Light and dark. Life and death. Flight and fall. And the last guardian betrayed its oath. Fled. Disappeared. Until now. Now, the owl has chosen you. You want to scream, but your mouth doesn't work. You want to run, but your legs aren't yours. You want to say no, but you've already said yes. The world folds. And you are somewhere else. Above. Beyond. You see everything. The past. The bones. The feathers. The dreams. The rituals. The villagers kneeling in the woods in a trance, their eyes closed, their lips chanting your name. And then, just like that, you're back. In your home. By the fire. Holding a feather. Normal again. Except not. Because now, you see through everything. You see the hidden patterns in the moss. The way the candle flickers in ancient code. The scratchings on the floor that are not random but records. You have become the new watcher. And the owl? Gone. For now. Back to the skies. Back to the void. Waiting for the next betrayal. The next dreamer. The next feathered inheritance. And outside, the villagers return. One by one. Yawning. Blinking. Stretching. As if nothing happened. Jitha bakes a pie. The priest sings a hymn. The children chase a pig through the mud. Life resumes. But every now and then, they look at you. And you look back. And they remember, faintly, something about wings. And sleep. And a name that was once yours. But isn't anymore. Sleep now. There's nothing more to fear. Unless, of course, you hear the hoot. Again. You don't wake up this time. Because you don't sleep anymore. Not the way you used to. Not the way mortals do. You lie still in your bed. The straw mat has softened under your weight, or perhaps you've grown so still that it no longer resists you. Your hearth has burned to embers. Not cold. Not warm. Just there. Flickering faintly like it knows better than to ask questions. Outside, the wind makes no sound. It knows better too. Because you are the watcher now. The villagers don't speak of that night. Not out loud. Not even in whispers. It's like the memory of what happened, the feathers, the woods, the sky filled with wings, has folded itself neatly away into the part of the brain reserved for traumatic weather events and tax collection. They nod at you in passing. Some avert their eyes. A few bow slightly, even though no one ever taught them to. They don't know why. They just know they should. Your days are filled with observing. Watching. The cows. The clouds. The movement of shadows around the church steeple. Patterns in spilled water. You don't eat much. You don't need much. You're not human anymore. Not entirely. Your reflection looks human most of the time. But mirrors occasionally disagree. The puddle by the bakery once showed you as feathers and smoke. You nodded politely and stepped around it. Because that's what watchers do. They watch. But just because the villagers have resumed their daily dose of mud, turnips, and mild trauma doesn't mean the story ends here. No, now we shift perspectives. Because while you became something other, the rest of the world kept spinning like a lopsided wagon wheel with emotional damage. And in another village, 3 days' ride northeast if you had a horse, which you don't because yours ran off with the tanner's apprentice during the owl episode, a different problem is stirring. You wouldn't know about it. Not directly. But you sense it. Like an itch at the edge of thought. A breeze where there should be stillness. It starts with a baby. They always do. The baby is born with a mark. A perfect black circle on her palm. The midwife says it's a sign of good luck. The priest says it's the devil's hoofprint. The grandmother says nothing, just stares and crosses herself so many times her elbow clicks. They named the baby Isabet. And Isabet? She hoots in her sleep. Like an owl. Now, in medieval Europe, there are 3 kinds of baby reactions. Immediate demon smiting, usually by fire or holy water. Vague superstition-based relocation, often involving woods or wells, or pretending everything is fine while secretly panicking forever. They choose option 3. Because the local baron had recently outlawed spontaneous combustion without proper paperwork. So they raise her. Quietly. Cautiously. She grows. Not quickly. Not normally. Just differently. By age 5, she can mimic the calls of any bird she hears. By age 7, she sees in the dark better than the village cats. By age 9, she stops talking entirely, except in dreams, where she speaks a language no one remembers. But you do. Because late at night, in your cottage, you hear her words echoing in the fire. Words older than wood, deeper than bones. She is not the first. She will not be the last. She is the herald. Now, historically speaking, Europe was full of omens. Every cough, every strange cloud, every child born with a 6 toe was either a blessing or a curse, and usually both, depending on which neighbor you asked. Owls, of course, were prime suspect material. A single hoot could shut down a harvest. A pair of owls seen flying during the day, entire villages would evacuate, or drown a goat, depending on their mood. But Isabet, she attracts owls. They follow her. She sits in the field, and they land nearby. Not to attack, just to be there. She feeds them grain. Owls don't eat grain, but they eat it anyway. This, naturally, begins to concern the villagers. It starts small. Little whispers. Curious glances. Sudden changes in direction when she walks by. Then someone's milk curdles after she passes their house, and suddenly everyone agrees she should be removed. Gently. Politely. Maybe into a ravine. The parents refuse. The priest offers to bless her with holy water and a firm shove. But before anything happens, the owls come. Hundreds. All at once. They block the roads, perch on rooftops, fill the sky like soot, and just stand, watching. No one can move. No one can breathe. Until morning, when they're gone. And so is Isabet. Just vanished. No footprints. No note. Just feathers. One in each villager's bed. You know this, of course, without being told. Because one of the feathers, hers, appears on your doorstep, slightly warm, and carrying a message. You don't read it with your eyes. You feel it. You dream it. You remember it. And the message is simple. Prepare. Now, if this were a comforting bedtime story, this is where I'd tell you it was all just a dream. That none of this ever happened. That owls are just birds and feathers don't carry destiny, and little girls can't summon ancient gods with bedtime hoots. But this isn't bedtime comfort. This is boring history. And boring history is rarely boring. Let's go deeper. Historically, the idea of a herald, someone born to bring forth a prophecy or an age or a very unpleasant goose-themed apocalypse, wasn't new. Every culture had its version. In Norse myth, it was a crow who cried before Ragnarok. In Egyptian lore, the ibis, cousin to the owl, carried messages from Thoth, god of knowledge. In Eastern Europe, they spoke of the strix, a night bird that drank blood and whispered truth into babies' ears as they slept. In rural France, it was believed that some children, if born during an eclipse, were moon-touched, meaning they would never quite belong to the human world again. They would dream of other skies, speak in lost tongues, and walk between the worlds. Isabet was all of these, and none of them, because something bigger is coming. And you, the watcher, will see it. But you won't stop it. You can't. Because it's not a curse. It's a return. The world isn't ending. It's remembering what it was before. Before people. Before fire. Before maps and popes and porridge. A time of wings. Of shadows. Of deep forests and deeper silence. You were chosen to witness it. And she, Isabet, is the key. You do not fear this. Not anymore. You just watch. As the stars shift. As the wind sings in ancient tones. As the last feather falls. And the next dream begins.